Welcome in to Three True Values as we have college basketball to talk about. That's right. The NCAA season is underway. Starting on Monday, we got our first look at what these teams look like in real game action, counting towards the record. So we will walk you through some of the key games that we saw take place. Not a lot of big marquee matchups here in this first week, but we did get one and it was a blowout. So I think it says a lot about two of those teams. We'll take you through some of the big performers, the guys that we were watching this week, how they finished, what we saw from them. And then in the second segment, we will talk a little bit about this Tyreek Smith situation at Memphis. He has entered the transfer portal. Of course, he stepped away from the program earlier on this preseason. I guess it was not really the off season, citing some NIL concerns. His agent got involved. His former AAU coach was involved. A lot of mixed reporting there. He ends up back with the program. We'll get into all of that now in the transfer portal in the second segment. In the third segment, as always, we'll get you out of here with the games of the week, everything that you need to watch for over the next 7 days of college basketball before we speak again. Also want to alert you guys that now that we are into the college basketball season, I will be doing a little bit more content here with the podcast, planning on Tuesday to kind of do a question answer type of thing. That'll be every other week, starting next week. So we'll probably send something out, gather some questions from you guys, and just answer some of the questions that you want to know early in this college basketball season as we get into things. Of course, as the season progresses, the closer we get to the tournament, a lot of those questions I'm sure will turn to bracketology as I continue to update you there. If you want a preseason look, that's up now at On 3. I do want to go ahead and lead off this podcast with a little bit of an apology. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're listening on the podcast, it should come through just fine. There should be no difference in how you consume it. But having some technical difficulties, the camera situation has not quite been worked out. And so right now it might be coming through lower quality than you are used to with the podcast. You'll also notice no intro music coming into the show. Hope to have that resolved relatively quickly. Can't guarantee that it'll be by next week or anything, but that is on the agenda to get fixed. So as we keep rolling through this, let's talk about it. Let's talk about college basketball because it is underway. As I said, we got our first round of games. Of course, the first tip-off early in the morning was IU Indy versus an NAIA in-state opponent. They ran away with it. I did have some people asking me what the deal is with them no longer being IUPUI. From my understanding, essentially what happened is those in-state schools, because it applies to Indy as well as Fort Wayne, kind of splintered off over the past couple of years. Rather than doing the Indiana University, Purdue University, and then the city, some of them now have the Indiana University tag. Others have the Purdue tag with them. So it is now IU Indy and Purdue Fort Wayne rather than the IP, et cetera, that it was previously. So with that resolved, let's get into some of the bigger games, the ones that really started to matter as we got through the rest of the day. Kansas ran away with it against Howard. Don't think there was anything surprising there. Alabama, this was one where I was interested to see what does the depth look like. Of course, they were down a few people. You've got some of the players who came back coming off of the bench, so we don't really know what that starting lineup is going to look like yet. And I think it could be fluid throughout the season, given the strength and the depth of that roster. But the one thing that is for sure, Mark Sears is a National Player of the Year candidate. I think he's probably the front runner, and he did nothing to dispel that in that first game. I thought he was outstanding. Gets up to 20 points, and just all around a solid first night in for the Crimson Tide. Cliff Omarui looks exactly like what they thought they were getting. He's a rim protector. He can rebound the basketball. He is that center that they wanted in the system that they really honestly were lacking last year, that Grant Nelson was kind of forced into that situation. We'll love to see what he's able to do now that he steps more into that natural 4 spot and maybe gets a couple reserve minutes at the 5. Houston rolls, no concern there. Iowa State does the same. But the big game of the night, the one that I think that everyone had their eyes on, well, if they stayed up that late because it was a late night tip-off, was Gonzaga against Baylor. And it turned out to not be very competitive. Gonzaga rolls out of there with a 101-63 victory. Baylor looks like a team of new players. They look like a young team. Obviously, they're going to be very reliant on VJ Edgecombe. We knew that coming in. Jason Asamoah looks like he needs some more coming up to speed with the college game. Jeremy Roach did not have a fantastic performance, nor Chad O'Meara, his first game there as well. So I think they're still kind of gelling these pieces. I don't have any concern that they're going to be a good team. I might pump the brakes on top of college basketball, which I think was definitely in play in the preseason when you just looked at what they had, but it's going to take them time. I did say during the offseason, I said Jalen Celestine going to be a nice depth pickup. He had a decent performance, I thought, off of the bench. But for Gonzaga, it was just an all-out blitz. And they get Graham Ike back. Ryan Nembhard running the show there. Nolan Hickman had a big game scoring the ball. And I think that they're Michael Ajayi, a guy that I made it clear in the offseason I really like. And they just keep going. I mean, Ben Gregg, you can keep going through the list of guys that can be real contributors and have a familiarity, most of them, with this system, with this team. So I think Gonzaga is going to be right up there, maybe even better than we thought. I know they were the number 6 team coming into the season, but I mean, I'm pushing them towards that Final Four conversation already. Of course, plenty of time for them to prove or disprove that throughout the course of the season. But the big highlight from that game somehow ended up not being Gonzaga coming out of there with nearly a 40-point victory. And it would have been 40 points if not for a huge dunk by VJ Edgecombe over Mark Few's son. Unfortunately, got caught on a poster. That video has gone viral. If you haven't seen it, check it out. Just an absolute full display of what VJ Edgecombe could be. The athleticism, the power. And, man, I mean, look, I will say in my time playing basketball, I think I've blocked 1 dunk attempt. But my general rule, if it's clear he's going to dunk the ball and there's nothing you can do to stop it, especially if you're down almost 40 points, just get out of the way. Like, just get out of the way. It's not worth it being on the poster. Elsewhere, though, in college basketball, throughout the night, Duke and North Carolina both rolled. Duke, obviously, Cooper Flagg, his debut, that was the big talking point. He did not have the most efficient night, but he made a big impact, ended up getting his scoring total up there, and, you know, assists, rebounds, defense, all the things he provides, they were on display. The shooting, I think it'll come. I'm not overly concerned about that. But Konkanopel, hey, that guy can shoot. And teams are going to have to figure out very quickly that they have to guard him. He has been now, ever since the preseason really started, back to the beginning of camp, I've been looking at him as a guy who's going to be a breakout freshman, who's going to start moving steadily up and up these draft boards, because he provides something that every NBA team wants, and that is just instant offense on the perimeter, and a guy who I think can play well with others around him. Now, how high can he move up in those conversations? That's going to be determined a lot by his defense and what people are able to see there, as well as if he can develop anything as an initiator, as a creator. Can he get involved in any other ways than the scoring, than the shooting that we know that he provides already? North Carolina, they have 2 impact freshmen. Of course, RJ Davis had a huge game in his season debut. But Drake Powell and Ian Jackson, mixed bag. Not a whole lot of production. They both come off the bench, which I thought was interesting. Also, we saw Jalen Washington start at center. That was a big question mark throughout the offseason. Who would get that starting role? Van Allen Lubin ends up coming off the bench there in that one. Will Riley, big. I mean, he comes out has a good debut for Arizona. Tennessee, I think Chaz Lanier's first game was a success for the Volunteers. And as we go down through, Purdue knocked off Texas A&M Corpus Christi. No real concerns there. Braden Smith is really, really good. Ended up with, I think, 15 assists in that game. Just a big performance from him. And I thought it was closer throughout most of it than I anticipated. Texas A&M Corpus Christi did not just go away. They kept it, in that 10-point range for quite a bit of the part of the game, at least that I was watching. But what is this Purdue team without Zach Edey? Because I think they've gotten a lot of hype here as a top 15 team in the country. Of course, they're going to repeat it. It's Matt Painter. They've done it year after year now for a few years, but there's no two-time National Player of the Year there. And beyond that, there's no center who's really played any minutes at all. Because Zach Edey played just about the entire basketball game. And now you have these young guys coming in. Jacobson got the start. Trey Kaufman-Renn, they like to play him at the 4. I saw some people say he might play the 5, but no, I think that they've got enough guys there at the 5 that they would want to keep him in his natural position. Camden Hyde, like what do they do? Will Berg, who ends up that center? Do they get a go-to guy? Because they're not going to have Zach Edey. That's something that you may never coach again at Purdue, having a 2-time National Player of the Year who was that big, that dominant at what he did. So they're going to have to do it in different ways. And I thought that there was some reason for hope and some reason for concern at different points during that day, that opening game. Marquette also rolls through their first game. But one team that got knocked off, Texas A&M, somebody that I've been lower on than the consensus this year. I said it in our preview with David Cobb. I just can't trust them because they're so up and down. It feels like you can never get a grasp on what the Aggies really are. And this was a perfect example. UCF, a team that is, I called them the last chance U team of college basketball this year. They went out and really just sold out on, we're going to bring in as many talented guys as we can and hope that we can just mesh these pieces together. And if you were to ask me any team in the power conferences who would need time to gel before they could pull this off, UCF would have been near the top of the list. Of course, we've got a couple teams in college basketball who are replacing all scholarship players or close to all in a couple other cases, but UCF, among the teams that had returning players, would have been one of the teams that I would have said, no, okay, they're going to need time because they're going to have to sort this out. They're going to have to make sure everyone's pulling the same rope. They're going to have to make sure, just a lot of things going on there. And they come out and they beat a Texas A&M team that brings back a lot of production, should, in theory, be about as ready to go of a product in college basketball that we're going to get these days. And they just weren't able to pull it out. So that one was big. Ohio State knocks off Texas, another team. New coach comes in. He's building his new roster, and what's that going to look like? Rotations. You bring in Michi Johnson, a high volume guy, a lot of on ball. How does he integrate into things? Well, they end up knocking off Texas, who I think, if I have any concern, if I'm going to press the overreaction button in a negative way on any team through just one night of college basketball, it might be Texas. And the reason that I say that is not because they lose to Ohio State. Ohio State is still a bubble team. They're a very good basketball team. Likely will compete in the Big Ten throughout the season. But for the Longhorns, there is a depth concern here. They just were not that deep off the bench. Trey Johnson gives them 29 in his college debut, a huge game, really good performance if you're somebody who's going to be compared to Kevin Durant early in your career. Obviously different players, but that comparison has come up in their work ethic, their potential as a basketball player. Well, beyond him, you've got a couple of guys in that starting lineup who can provide for you. But then you get to the bench and, man, it gets thin quickly. There's just not a whole lot of depth in this group for Rodney Terry. And so I think that they're going to have to get, maybe not growth, because Trey Johnson gave them 29. but can they get growth in the cohesive aspect of this team? Can these guys learn to play together a little bit better? Just that little bit of crispness. Is that enough to take them over the top as the type of team that can make a deep NCAA tournament run? Plenty of other games throughout the night. Do want to touch on Mark Pope getting his first win as the Kentucky coach in a runaway victory. Liked a lot of what I saw from their scheme. Look, they get out and they run, they shoot. They've got some good defenders. I like what I see from them early on, and we'll see. I mean, they're replacing the entire roster. It's very difficult to do, but early signs are that they're going to get into his system and they're going to get things rolling and just take their chances there. On Tuesday, we moved on. We had more college basketball to watch. Kansas State, one of the interesting teams. I told you I was very fascinated in what they would do. Well, they don't start Ugonna Onyenso. And I thought that was interesting. Instead, they go with David Gasson, who started last year. We talked with Derek Young in the preseason about that. Well, I don't think Onyenso is going to take his starting job just yet. Gasson comes out with 21 points and 15 rebounds in his season debut alongside Coleman Hawkins. And yeah, that'll win you the starting job just about every time if you're able to put up those numbers. Also across the board that night, BYU runaway victory against Central Arkansas. Nothing really to talk about there other than Kevin Young's debut and the fact that Igor Demine, the international prospect, he had a big night. 18 points, 11 assists, and 4 steals. He looks like he's going to translate things to college basketball very quickly here in the States. Great Osabor, his debut at Washington under Danny Sprinkle. Another just big-time performance, 15 points, 17 rebounds, and 6 steals. I mean, you're gonna see some of these crazy stat lines because it's a lot of bye games right now that we're watching. But that doesn't take away from how just incredible it is to put up that kind of production over the course of one game. Of course, on Wednesday, John Calipari's debut against Lipscomb. They start out with a win in that column. Lipscomb already played 2 games this early in the season. They're doing a little tour here. They're now 1-1. But yeah, John Calipari, look, his teams are never going to be judged on what happens in November. It's always going to be that conference schedule. How can he perform from January through to early March and then in the NCAA tournament? That's what people care about. Can he win titles? Can he win the regular season SEC title, the conference championship? Can he win an NCAA tournament? Can he reach the Final Four? Those are the mile markers that he's looking for. We're still going to have to wait and see, good performances, but Lipscomb's not going to tell us much about what he's able to do there. UConn, of course, runs away. The quest for a three-peat is underway. And then Rutgers, no Ace Bailey in the debut, so nothing to talk about yet for him, as in that conversation between him and Cooper Flagg, who can kind of establish themselves. Obviously Cooper Flagg right now the front runner, but Ace Bailey, I think, the guy who people think can at least contend in that second spot. When we come back on the other side, we will talk through the Tyreek Smith situation at Memphis. What's going on? The initial situation, what's happened since, where are things now? How does that impact the season? A lot to unpack there. We'll be back on 3 True Values. Welcome back in to the second segment of this week's episode as we talk about Tyreek Smith at Memphis, everything that's gone on. So here's where we stand today. Tyreek Smith is in the transfer portal, as reported by On3. Pete Nikos had it first. And it was later reported that him and Penny Hardaway sat down and agreed that it was time for him to leave the program. Now, as we get into more of the reported stuff, the story behind it, how do we get to this point? Because entering the transfer portal the day college basketball opens, not what you often see. Memphis went on to get a victory over Missouri, something that in theory will help them in their resume throughout the year. But how do we get here? And where do we go from here? in the Memphis program. Penny Hardaway has been described as a hot seat coach by a lot of national media members throughout this offseason, entering the 2024-25 season. From my understanding, that is not necessarily true. I do not believe that he is currently on the hot seat in the sense that if results are below par, he will be fired. I do not think that that would happen. Now, could there be a situation throughout the course of this year where one of these two things happens? A, they continue to have controversy. They continue to have issues, whether it's NIL, whether it's players in or out of the team, whether it's, legal problems, NCAA rules violations. If those things continue and ramp up and get worse for the university, sure, there could be a situation where they part ways. Or B, the second, path that certainly could happen, I'm not predicting at all is, would be for Penny Hardaway to look himself in the mirror after this year, regardless of how results go, but most likely if results go poorly, could he look in the mirror and say, what am I doing this for? This is the city that I love. This is the program that I was a major part in building the identity for. What am I doing all of this for? It's not always fun. Clearly he has had some issues with the way that he's been covered, the constant news surrounding the program. It's not like he loves the drama of all of this. Now, some of it has been bred through him. There's no doubting that. But he's not the guy who's out front, every time talking to the media, excited that he's talking, whether it's good, bad, indifferent publicity. He does not want to deal with the bad news. And so could there be a situation where he just looks and says, man, can I keep doing this? I mean, the results aren't good. Nobody's really happy, and walk away? Sure. I don't think either of those things will happen. And that's why I say the furthest thing he is really from the hot seat right now. I don't think that the university is firing him based on anything that happens in this season unless things go horribly wrong. Which, look, they picked up a good win over Missouri in the middle of about as much controversy as you can have on Monday. So I think he'll be all right. He's got a good staff. We'll see how this plays out. But back to the Tyreek Smith situation. A lot of this Penny Hardaway talk has been centered on this idea in the national media that how long can the program put up with constant news? Most of it not good. I mean, we all know the James Wiseman situation. We know about Imani Bates leaving the program and coming back. We know about bringing in Naquan Tomlin. We know about Jordan Brown leaving and coming back. It's just been time after time, these different stories within the program. Even Emmanuel Acott, people forget he came to the program, ends up leaving before ever playing a game. There's just all kinds of things that are happening at Memphis. And I do think that the new athletic department has started to rein in a little bit of that. There is a good working relationship with Ed Scott, now Tim Duncan, who's kind of the liaison there. And I don't think that they're going to get in the way of Penny doing what he does, but there is more of an understanding that this is a team. It's not just Penny and his program, and then the University of Memphis is over here running their own thing, which is important. In the NIL era especially, I mean, FedEx is giving a lump sum to the university. And so having that relationship between sports and across the athletic department is important in your ability to divvy that up and keep everyone happy. But as we talk about things continuing to happen, he already made coaching changes late in this cycle. There was an anonymous letter that was written about potential violations that has now been addressed. They've looked into some of that. So we're already in the preseason, 2 stories in for Memphis basketball. Now Tyreek Smith. The story starts with him stepping away from the program for a couple of days. And in response, Memphis fans getting frustrated, understandably, when this is the third major story of the season and they haven't even tipped off. Well, Tyreek Smith's people in his circle did not take kindly to that. They respond on social media, which they also have the right to do. Now things get ugly. Things start to be said about the Memphis program. Are they not paying Tyreek Smith? Are they backing out on NIL promises? Who promised him what? Was it a starting role? Was it more money? What's going on? And then Gary Parrish from CBS Sports, another basketball writer who's in Memphis on the ground, he's very close to the program, gets information that Tyreek Smith is being paid, would be paid over the course of the year, about $500,000. He had already been paid over $130,000 before the season started. So not an NIL issue. If anything, now a fourth story appears where coaches around the country and analysts, everybody really around college basketball, is talking about why in the world are they paying this guy $500,000? What happened? Why would they pay a sixth man that kind of money? And so now there's a whole different conversation going on around the program. Well, then things get resolved, cooler heads prevail, whatever the case was. Tyreek Smith comes back to the program. The university posts pictures of him with the team at practice. Everything's good. Everything's great. Well, then he doesn't play in the scrimmage, and they list him with an injury. And we approach the weekend before the season tips off. It has been reported, I have not had this confirmed, but it has been reported that Tyreek Smith, scheduled a meeting with Penny Hardaway to request more NIL money, at which point Penny Hardaway put his foot down and said no. And that's when things ended up turning the way they did. Penny Hardaway lets him know that he can leave the program. Tyreek Smith enters the transfer portal. That is the story as we have heard it today. Now, there could be more twists, turns, who knows? But in the background on Monday, there was this kind of whisper that Dane Dange's status might be in question. Now, that ends up not coming to be. He played decently well against Missouri. From my understanding, it's not something that's on the horizon right now with that program. But look, neither was Tyreek Smith leaving after they resolved that. So there's going to be a level of constant wondering about this program and can they keep everyone happy? So there's just a lot going on here at Memphis. And the question is, can they overcome it? Because they've got real questions on the court. But if I'm being honest, I've got Memphis in bracketology as a borderline 10 or 11 seed, just above the cut line to be an at-large versus being only in the tournament because they're a conference champion. And I do still have them as the conference champion, but I've put real thought into dropping them down. I'm not going to now because they beat Missouri. They looked good. But I have real concerns on the basketball side of things. Can they shoot threes? Can they hit free throws? What does the gel of that rotation look like? Who can play together in different lineups, different situations? But those pale in comparison to how far I drop them, because they have shown no ability year over year to be a consistent day in, day out program. You can't lose to Rice. You just can't. You cannot be an NCAA tournament at-large team and lose to Rice in the AAC schedule. There's no room for error in that conference anymore. There's just not. There's no Houston. You can't salvage the season with a big win against Houston in the final weekend like they did so many times early in Penny Hardaway's tenure. Hey, there's not even an SMU to just kind of boost the general strength of schedule. You don't have much left here in terms of basketball teams, and so you are expected to run the table. And that takes a level of commitment, a level of focus, a level of teamwork that the program has not shown in a while now. So hope to be proven wrong, but right now they are in the NCAA tournament field. They are the AAC favorite. Not in the coaches poll because they clearly have the same concerns that a lot of other people have about their ability to run a season from start to finish. But talent-wise, there's no question. Go look at all the computer models. They're far better than any of these other teams. It's going to be about putting together a consistent, quiet season. Quiet is good for Memphis. Memphis does not need to enter the NCAA tournament as a 2 seed that's flying up. No, they need to enter as a 6, 7 seed that you haven't heard much from all season. That would be the ideal situation for Penny Hardaway's group this year. When we come back on the other side, we'll give you the games of the week as we look ahead at what you need to be watching as we continue the college basketball season. It's here, guys. We've got plenty on deck. Welcome back to the final segment of this week's episode as we take you through the games of the week. If you're unfamiliar, if you're new to the podcast, every week in this final segment, we just take a couple of minutes to run you through which games you need to watch. If you're sitting down in front of the TV on any given night this week, we're going to tell you the one game you should go out of your way to turn on so that you can get a better grasp on the state of college basketball. We're going to try and mix it up. Every week, it's not going to be the same teams. We're not just going to say Duke every week because Cooper Flagg is there. We're going to go a little bit deeper on some of the cuts. We're going to make sure that you catch all of the teams you need to watch before we get to March. That way you have a good understanding of how things stand. Once you're filling out your bracket, you can kind of pull from the memory banks. You say, oh, I remember I watched that team. I liked what they looked like. You can say, maybe I didn't like that team at all. They took a bad loss when I watched them. Help you fill out the bracket that way. Trying to make more educated basketball fans here. That's our goal on 3 True Values. So, Thursday night, tonight, what's on TV? Not a lot of big games, but we've got Florida and Jacksonville. We'll take that one. A little in-state matchup there. See Florida coming off of a win against South Florida. Can they just keep things rolling? Todd Golden's team looks very good. Interested with that front court rotation as much as anything because we know how good those guards can be. On Friday, there's no question what our game of the day is. Kansas facing off against North Carolina. 2 of the bluest of blue bloods. Will be fun to see what happens in that one. Just two top 10 teams. This early in the season, you can't beat it. On Saturday, we're going to go with Auburn against Houston. Now, Arkansas Baylor probably would have had my vote here not too long ago, but Baylor slips up in their opener. Didn't look like they were quite ready for these big games. So, while it could be a good one, and if you've got 2 TVs or if you've got, time to flip back and forth, I would try to watch both of these games. But we're going to go with Auburn and Houston because I know these 2 teams will be there at the end of the season. No doubt about it. And I think that they're 2 of the most ready-to-go teams in the country. So we're going to get high-level basketball right off the bat to start the season between these 2 with a lot of returning talent coming back from both sides. So Auburn and Houston. On Sunday, we're going to watch Gonzaga against Arizona State. Let's see if the Zags can double down on it. Just blow out another big team, another team from the Big 12, in fact. And then on Monday, Alabama against McNeese. That's right. Nate Oates against Will Wade. Not going to want to miss that coaching matchup for sure. And then McNeese, they took an early loss. They're going to likely bounce back before that Alabama game. But this is a big test and an opportunity for that McNeese team. We know is loaded, especially for a Southland Conference team. That team is absolutely loaded. So can Will Wade repeat his success from last year? And can he pick up a big statement win early on in the year for the Cowboys? On Tuesday, again, there's no real question here. We're going to go Duke against Kentucky. Mark Pope's first big test. I mean, it's going to be Cooper Flagg, Cone Knopel, all those guys against this fresh look of a Kentucky roster. All these transfers coming together. How will they perform on both sides? I think is going to be really fascinating to see. And then on Wednesday, as we wrap things up for the week, we're going to go a little bit not too far off the beaten trail. Still power conferences here, but we're going to go Vanderbilt against California because there's truthfully not a lot of high impact games on the schedule for that day. So let's take a look at two teams that, sure, we might not watch a lot throughout the season, but could be a reference point, if nothing else, for some of these other teams, whether it's the ACC or the SEC. You know, how much you can beat certain teams by, whether you lose to certain teams, that kind of is a gauge. And so let's see what those two teams look like early in the season. Once again, I want to thank everyone for tuning in to Three True Values. We'll be back next week. Tuesday, we'll be doing a Q&A type of podcast. And then on Thursday, our regular show. Thanks for tuning in.